Now, say my name.
You're D. Cranks.
You're goddamn right.
Hello YouTube, it's your boy DC back with another video that isn't related to music, although this show does have some banger needle drops in it. So I just rewatched Breaking Bad for the third time. Okay, first of all, if you've never seen Breaking Bad, why are you even watching this video? This is your last chance to avoid spoilers, so save this video to your watch later and come back to it once you've seen the show. It may have ended over 10 years ago at this point, but it still has a massive impact on pop culture. I don't think I can scroll Instagram without seeing at least one Breaking Bad meme a day. It's crazy how it's still relevant to this day, and that's because of how good it is. It's universally beloved by the internet, critically acclaimed with tons of awards, and has been regarded as the greatest TV show of all time. Now me personally, I've always been more of a YouTube and movie guy, so I don't really watch that many TV shows, but I finally decided to get around to watching Breaking Bad for the first time in 2020, and I gotta say, it definitely lives up to the hype. Why do you think I've seen it 3 times? And it's just as good every time. So today I will be sharing my top 10 favorite episodes. There are 62 episodes across 5 seasons, and there truly aren't any bad episodes in my opinion, so narrowing it down to a top 10 wasn't very easy, but this is what I do on this channel, so I'm pretty used to it. I do have 15 honorable mentions to go through, so let's get started. My first honorable mention is the pilot. Fantastic opening that gets you hooked right away. Next is Season 1, Episode 6, Crazy Handful of Nothing. While the pilot was definitely intriguing and led me to keep watching, this right here is the episode that really got me hooked, and I had to start binge watching the rest of the show. Next is Season 2, Episode 8, Better Call Saul. It really pains me not to include this one in the top 10 because it's the introduction of one of the best characters in the show, and is honestly one of the funniest episodes. Next is Season 2, Episode 9, 4 Days Out. Another one that hurts not to include in the top 10, and I know a lot of people argue this is one of the first episodes that propelled the show into legendary status. This does have some of the best character moments between Walt and Jesse from the whole show. Yet another Season 2 honorable mention, we have Episode 11, Mandala. Amazing introduction of the show's best villain in my opinion, Gus Fring. Our last Season 2 honorable mention is Episode 12, Phoenix. Huge turning point in the show when Walt decides to let Jane die. Moving on to a couple of Season 3 honorable mentions. First up is Episode 6, Sunset. The whole plot of Hank finding the RV while Walt and Jesse are hiding in it is hilarious.
This is my own private domicile and I will not be harassed! Bitch!
And the reveal at the end of Gus putting the Salamanca twins onto Hank is a crazy cliffhanger in a show full of crazy cliffhangers. The episode immediately following it is also an honorable mention. Of course, I'm talking about Season 3, Episode 7, 1 Minute. Everyone remembers the insane shootout between Hank and the Salamanca twins at the end of the episode. I've got a couple honorable mentions from Season 4. First of which is the season opener, Box Cutter. Season 3 ended with an insane cliffhanger, and the start of this season picks right up with a very tense scene between Gus, Walt, and Jesse that lets you know it's going to be a power struggle for the rest of the season. My other Season 4 honorable mention is Episode 10, Salute. I really wanted to include this in the top 10 because that cartel scene is one of the best of the whole series, but what holds this back is Walt being in a pretty sad state at his apartment after his fight with Jesse. He's talking to his son a lot, and honestly those scenes are kind of a drag to get through, even if they are rare one-on-one heartfelt moments between the two. I've got 5 honorable mentions for Season 5. First is the opener, Live Free and Die. The aftermath of the Season 4 finale picks right up and is action-packed throughout. The team does some really cool science stuff.
Yeah, bitch! Magnets! Oh!
And there's even a teaser for the final episode, which we didn't fully realize at the time. Next is Episode 7, Say My Name. Of course, it opens with that iconic scene that I used in the beginning of this video. But it also ends with a pretty shocking scene when Walt kills my personal favorite character in the whole show, Mike, over basically nothing but his pride and ego.
You and your pride and your ego.
Next is Episode 11, Confessions. We got a hilarious Mexican restaurant scene, the iconic confession tape with that meme.
My name is Walter Hartwell White. I live at 308 Negro Royal Lane.
And seemingly the end of Jesse Pinkman before he finally makes that connection about the rice and cigarette, and he goes to seemingly burn Walt's house down, which is one of the strongest cliffhangers in the show once again. Second to last honorable mention is Episode 13, To'Hajiilee. Very important episode as Hank and Jesse lead Walt into a trap to arrest him, and we get that insane twist of Jack's gang showing up at the last second. I don't know how people had to wait a whole week to see how the shootout ended. And finally, my last honorable mention is the penultimate episode of the series, Granite State. A great episode in its own right. It may be a little slow at times, but it's sandwiched between two of the absolute best episodes in the whole show. That final shot of the empty glass with the opening theme song playing gives me chills every time. So with all of the honorable mentions out of the way, it's finally time to dive into the top 10. After finding out that a couple street dealers are using his girlfriend's kid brother to deal meth, Jesse plots to kill them with ricin. He tries to get Walt to help him, but he will not, and so Walt actually goes to tell Gus what Jesse plans to do. Then Mike and his guys pick Jesse up, and he learns that the street dealers actually work for Gus, and he will not allow them to be killed. We then get an amazing monologue by Mike about half measures, hinting that Walt should kill Jesse, which would relieve a lot of problems. We then cut to Jesse getting high and walking towards the street dealers at night with his gun. Some pretty intense music is playing at this point, and just as it looks like the dealers are about to shoot Jesse, Walt's car comes flying in out of nowhere. He runs them over, kills one instantly, gets out of his car, grabs his gun, and shoots the other one in the head. The camera pans up to him and he simply looks at Jesse and says, "Run." That scene is a huge turning point in the show, as it basically starts the downfall of Gus and Walt's relationship and Pollos Hermanos as a whole, as Walt wants to take more control and is more loyal to Jesse than to anyone else. This one was the end of the first half of season 5. After Mike's death in the previous episode, Walt hires Jack to kill Mike's 9 henchmen in prison, which leads to one of the most brutal scenes in the whole series, where Jack's prison connections take all 9, plus Mike's lawyer, out across 3 prisons in the span of 3 minutes. And the funny thing is, the music playing does not match what's happening on screen at all. It's a great juxtaposition. So this ties all the loose Pollos Hermanos ends and allows Walt's meth operation to operate uninhibited, which leads to my favorite montage in the whole series that shows the peak of Walt's business. Crystal Blue Persuasion is a fantastic song choice that makes the scene even better.
Crystal blue persuasion. It's a new vibration. Crystal blue persuasion. Crystal blue persuasion.
And then Skyler shows Walt his pile of money, and Walt finally decides to retire from the business. And just when you think he's going to get away with everything and live happily ever after 4.5 seasons of close calls, Hank finally puts the pieces together and figures out Walt is Heisenberg thanks to Walt leaving Gail's book on the toilet. It's probably the best reveal of the show, and I can't imagine waiting a whole year to see the second half of season 5 after that cliffhanger. I bet the feeling was similar to waiting for Endgame a whole year after Infinity War. This episode is a masterclass of tension. It almost plays out like a season finale, but it's just the second episode of the season. And I think that's because there was a writer's strike back when season 1 was ending or something, but don't quote me on that. The cold opening of the bouncing lowrider with bullets littered on the ground is fantastic foreshadowing, and one of the most memorable in the show. So Walt and Jesse have been kidnapped by Tuco and are being held at his house as they wait for his cousins to come pick them up to take them back to Mexico. And obviously Walt and Jesse do not want to go to Mexico with Tuco, so they try to devise a plan to kill him with the rice and meth they made, but it ain't going to be easy. They get close a couple of times, but manage to screw it up, which raises the suspicion of Tuco's mute uncle who uses a bell to communicate. I find it hilarious how this is our introduction to one of the most important characters in the show, Hector Salamanca. So he rats Walt and Jesse out to Tuco with his bell, and they start fighting outside. Meanwhile, while all this is going on, Hank is out looking for Walt across town, and he starts following the trail of Jesse's car. Walt and Jesse manage to get the upper hand on Tuco and shoot him, leaving him in a ditch, which is right when Hank shows up to the scene, so Walt and Jesse go hide. Hank has no idea that Tuco is there, so he's shocked to see him, and they get into a big shootout, ending with Hank killing Tuco. And it also results in the car bouncing and bullets sprayed, which ties back to the cold open, so it's a great bookend to the most suspenseful episode in the series up to that point. I feel as though most people would have this episode as an honorable mention because it's sandwiched between 2 peak episodes, but I think it's just as good. It starts with Walt sending his family to Hank and Marie's to have them protected by the DEA, while he stays at his house waiting for Gus to send someone to kill him. He's sitting out back, spinning his pistol, when we get a subtle shot of this Lily of the Valley plant. We don't know the full extent of Walt's plan at the time, but we can tell he's plotting something. Eventually, Jesse visits Saul and he learns that Gus is planning to kill Walt's entire family, and he later gets a call from Andrea that Brock is sick in the hospital. So Jesse realizes his ricin cigarette is missing, and he thinks Walt poisoned Brock, which of course we learn later that he did, but not with the ricin. So he confronts Walt in an incredibly well acted scene. The mind games Walt puts on Jesse in this scene is simply incredible, and just shows how manipulative he is. He's able to pin the poisoning on Gus as a mastermind move to get Jesse to kill Walt, because he knows that Jesse knows them two are the only people who know about the ricin cigarette and will blame him for it. So he finally gets Jesse back on his side against Gus, and they start plotting to kill him. Walt makes a bomb, puts it on the bottom of Gus's car in a very tense scene that makes Gus seem even more invincible, like he has a sixth sense, because he leaves the car and we cut to black. So yeah, even if most people would see this as a setup episode for End Times, I think it deserves a spot for that scene between Jesse and Walt alone. Of course, everyone knows the iconic ending scene this episode gets its name from. I remember the first time I saw it, I was actually creeped out by it. It felt like a horror movie scene, to be honest. Bryan Cranston's acting was phenomenal, going from screaming out of desperation into maniacal laughing, and the score and camera work is truly haunting. But that scene wouldn't be as impactful without the events leading up to it. After Hank gets dangerously close to discovering the lab at the laundromat, Gus drags Walt out to the desert and threatens his entire family in an all-time cold scene. Meanwhile, Skyler forces Ted to pay off the IRS with a bunch of Walt's money, so when they meet at the house and he learns about this, as he's trying to gather enough money to disappear his family, he freaks out and we get that iconic scene. At number 5, I have Season 5, Episode 5, Dead Freight. Who doesn't love a good heist plot? Even though this one does drive the plot forward, it definitely feels like a more standalone episode in the middle of all the Season 5 drama, which I can appreciate. The team needs more methylamine, so with the help of Lydia, they plan to steal it from a train. Simple, right? Of course not. A lot of things have to go right for them, and it's super exciting and intense. They distract the train engineers while siphoning out the methylamine and refilling the tank with water so that the weight stays the same. They do it until the very last second and it works. However, they notice a kid on a dirt bike was watching the whole thing go down, so Todd straight up shoots him, and we realize this dude is pure evil. Also, any episode that has Bill Burr in it is an instant plus. This episode centers around Gus planning to replace Walt and Jesse with Gale right after Walt killed his 2 street dealers. Jesse is hiding at the laser tag place, and him and Walt meet in secret, discussing how they need to kill Gale in order to save their own lives. Walt plans to do it himself, but he is kidnapped just as he's about to. He's brought to the lab by Victor and Mike, so he once again manipulates the two into thinking he'll give up Jesse, but tells Jesse on the phone that he'll have to kill Gale. We then get a heartbreaking scene of Jesse arriving at Gale's apartment. They both have tears in their eyes as Gale pleads him not to do it, and we get an amazing final shot that ends the season. Talk about another great cliffhanger. These 3 were extremely difficult to order, but at number 3, I have the series finale, Felina. This finale is extremely cathartic with so many payoffs. Walt returns to Albuquerque one last time to tie up a bunch of loose ends that include getting Gretchen and Elliot to give his son money legally. He visits Skyler one last time to give her the coordinates for Hank and Gomez's bodies. And he also delivers my favorite quote of the entire show.
I have to hear one more time that you did this for the family.
I did it for me. I liked it. I was good at it. And I was alive.
Finally, he visits Jack's compound and kills his entire gang with the insane machine gun contraption he made. And he also uses the ricin to kill Lydia and frees Jesse from his imprisonment. And we get a very appropriate death for the anti-hero, dying in a meth lab as Baby Blue plays in the background. I went back and forth between this and Felina, but I figured that Felina doesn't have quite the level of suspense this one has, so it gets the slight edge. When I watched this for the first time, I legit thought it was the end of the series, because I didn't even realize there was a season 5 at the time, which really just goes to show how good of an ending this was to the whole Gus arc. This episode opens with Walt retrieving the bomb from Gus's car and brings it into a hospital, which leads to a hilarious bickering scene between him and Jesse. Up to this point, Gus has been portrayed as this invincible figure, so both you as a viewer and the main characters are wondering if they're even going to be able to kill him at this point. Jesse is kidnapped at one point by Gus's henchmen to cook in the lab, which leaves Walt alone. So Walt goes to Saul, who tells him that Hector and Gus hate each other. So Walt decides to use Hector to pull Gus into his trap, where he has Hector kill Gus in an all-time scene. And then Walt frees Jesse from the lab. They set it on fire while some epic music is playing, and Walt celebrates with Jesse and Skyler as Jesse learns Brock was poisoned not by ricin, but by something called the Lily of the Valley plant, and we get a final shot of that plant near Walt's pool, realizing that it actually was Walt who poisoned Brock after all. And finally, my number one episode is no surprise to any Breaking Bad fan. It's Ozymandias. This episode has been talked about and analyzed countless times on the internet as not only being the best episode of Breaking Bad, but perhaps the greatest episode in the history of television. It does have a perfect score on IMDb, which is no easy feat. There are so many incredible scenes in this, and it follows the structure of a tragedy. His brother Hank is killed, and although that scene has been memed to death at this point, it really does represent the end of Walt's world, essentially. He has been telling us throughout the series that everything he did it for his family, but his actions directly led to the death of his brother-in-law, and on top of that, Jenks gangs steal 90% of his money, so it's like all of his work has been for nothing. At the same time this is happening, Marie thinks Hank is in the middle of arresting Walt and forces Skyler to tell Walter Jr. everything, so that is some great dramatic irony. We then get, in my opinion, the greatest scene in the entire show. Skyler, Walter Jr., and Holly arrive at their house to see a rough-looking Walt frantically packing up everyone's clothes. At this point, they are thinking Walt's already been arrested by Hank, and so they put the pieces together and realize Hank is dead, assuming Walt killed him, and Walt tries to convince them that he didn't.
You killed Hank.
What? No.
You killed
No! I tried to save him!
Skyler turns against Walt for good, refusing to leave with him, and we get a depressing fight scene between the two. Walter Jr. comes in to save his mom, and he calls the cops on his dad. Walt then kidnaps Holly and drives away while Skyler begs him to stop, and I think this is Anna Gunn's best acted scene in the show. The camera work, acting, everything works brilliantly in this scene, and it gets me every time. Later on, Walt plays into the Heisenberg act on the phone with Skyler while the cops are listening in order to free her from charges while he's clearly holding back tears. He leaves Holly in a fire truck for the firemen to return her to Skyler, and he gets picked up by the vacuum cleaner guy to disappear with a new identity. And that's it. It's dramatic, it's tragic, it's peak television in my opinion. I could talk about this episode all day, man, but like I said, there are plenty of other videos on it that probably do a better job than me, so you can go check those out if you want. Well, that about wraps this video up. If you like Breaking Bad, then I highly recommend the prequel Better Call Saul. It might have a bit of a slower start to it, but the writing and directing and acting, pretty much everything is just as good, if not better at times. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.